Mr. Speaker, it is my honor to rise today and speak to the government's 2020 Strategic Policy Statement, hereinafter referred to as the SPS. Mr. Speaker, the government's 2020 SPS outlines government's fiscal plans, policy priorities, and broad strategic outcomes for the next 3 financial years, which will cover the period from 1st of January 2020 to 31st of December 2022. This SPS will also guide the development of the detailed budget for the next budget period, consisting of 2 financial years, 1st of January to 31st of December 2020 and 1st of January to 31st of December 2021. This budget will be brought to this Honourable Legislative Assembly in the latter part of this year. Mr. Speaker, this SPS is the second one produced since we changed to a 2-year budgeting cycle, and it will be the last SPS by this administration before the next general elections to be held in 2021. Mr. Speaker, I begin by focusing and speaking first of the government's fiscal strategy. The government remains committed to a fiscal strategy that is centered on the following key principles: compliance with the principles of responsible financial management, in particular, achieving substantial surpluses each year, no new fees or taxes levied on the public, and no new borrowings. This SPS builds on these central guiding fiscal policy objectives for the management of the government's finances over the forecast period. Looking now at the compliance with the principles of responsible financial management, managing the government's operating expenditure in a way that maintains healthy operating surpluses remains a critical component of our financial management strategy. By managing our finances in this manner, the government is able to use the cash generated by these surpluses to steadily reduce debt, fund its capital investment program, and maintain cash reserves well above the minimum required by the principles of responsible financial management and the framework for fiscal responsibility set out in the Public Management and Finance Law, or PMFL. This element of our strategy is key to ensuring the long-term fiscal sustainability. It clearly demonstrates our commitment to being prudent stewards of the government's finances. No new fees or taxes levied on the public. As with the last SPS, government has made the conscious decision not to seek to introduce any new coercive revenue measures in the medium term in an effort to keep the tax burden, cost of living, and cost of doing business as low as possible. This will build confidence, give certainty to the private sector to continue making investments that will stimulate economic activity and employment opportunities. And third, Mr. Speaker, no new borrowings. During the SPS period, barring any major catastrophes or economic disruptions, government does not intend to incur any new borrowings. We plan to fund all of our operating expenditure and capital investments from cash generated from our operations and existing cash reserves. In fact, the government is planning to reduce public sector debt by a further $104 million during the forecast period. And Mr. Speaker, this will bring the government's public debt to the lowest level in more than 20 years. Turning my attention now to some of the more broad strategic objectives, Mr. Speaker. In addition to our fiscal strategy, this SPS is built on the 8 broad strategic outcomes which the government has agreed will guide our policy actions over this term. These outcomes are, in no particular order, a strong economy to help families and businesses, achieving full employment, jobs for all Caymanians, the best education opportunities for all our children, reducing crime and the fear of crime, access to quality, affordable health care, stronger communities and support for the most vulnerable, ensuring Caymanians benefit from a healthy environment, and stable, effective, and accountable government. Turning next to our economic forecasts. Mr. Speaker, this government remains committed to ensuring that our economy continues to grow in a stable and sustainable way that ensures maximum opportunities for Caymanians. We will continue with the major economic policy interventions introduced during the last administration, such as the reduced import duties, lower business licensing fees, development concessions, and extended support to small businesses. Over the next 3 financial years, the Economics and Statistics Office has forecast that our economy will grow at steady and healthy rates, in line with the forecast for the world's major economies, who are the source markets for our major economic pillars. Economic growth, as measured by the real gross domestic product, is expected to grow by 2.2% in 2020, 2.1% in 2021, and 2% in 2022. These forecasts are underpinned by the assumption that the 3 key sectors of the Cayman Islands economy, financial services, tourism, and business services, will all continue to evolve and maintain their global competitiveness. Economic growth, led by the construction sector, will be directly influenced by several large construction projects from the private and public sectors, including new hotel construction in Grand Cayman, completion of the new John Gray High School, development of the cruise and cargo ports in Georgetown, construction of the long-term residential mental health facility, and implementation of the new integrated solid waste management system. Over the next 3 years, economic growth will create additional jobs and is expected to keep the unemployment rate below 4%. Unemployment rates are forecast to be 3.5% in 2020, 3.6% in 2021, and 3.8% in 2022. Economic growth and increased levels of employment mean that the consumption of goods and services will increase. This, in turn, places upward pressure on the rate of inflation that is expected to increase by 2.2% in 2020, 2.2% in 2021, and the same amount in 2022. In order to manage and help manage the impact of inflation, government has taken the decision to leave in place the significant import duty reductions implemented in the last administration, most notably reduced import duty of 25 cents per gallon, down from 75 cents per gallon on fuel used by CUC for the generation of electricity, reduced import duty of 20%, down from 22%, for licensed traders on consumer goods for retail sale, and a reduced import duty of 15% on building materials. By keeping in place these import duty reductions, the government is doing its part to keeping retail prices as low as possible, thereby keeping the cost of living for households and the cost of doing business as low as possible. Mr. Speaker, I will now highlight the financial forecasts that are contained within the SPS document just tabled. The government's main revenue streams are directly tied to the level of consumption and rate of economic growth. As the economy grows, so do government's revenues. In line with that overall fiscal strategy, the government has no plans to introduce any new coercive revenue measures during the next 3 financial years. We will continue to pursue the implementation of enhanced business processes to improve the efficiency of revenue collection and the annual intake from the existing suite of revenue measures. Mr. Speaker, the SPS forecasts that the government's revenues will be approximately $829.1 million in 2020, $851 million in 2021, and $836.9 million in 2022. Now, these forecasts, Mr. Speaker, include one-off transfers to general revenues from cash assets of liquidated entities, which are forecast to be $33.7 million in 2020, $33.9 million in 2021, and $6.7 million in 2022. Mr. Speaker, government's expenditures are inextricably tied to the growth of our economy and population. As they grow too, so do the demands for government services. Our main goal is to manage our expenses in a sustainable manner that allows us to effectively deliver our services to the high standard expected. In line with this fiscal strategy, we are committed to keeping our operating expenditures well below operating revenues. Over the SPS period, government will seek to limit growth in operating expenditures while simultaneously pursuing operational efficiencies to reduce costs or limit growth in costs wherever possible. Core government operating expenditures are forecast to be $734.2 million in 2020, $741.7 million in 2021, and $746.8 million in 2022. Over the SPS period, increased operating expenditure will be used to fund a number of important initiatives, including, but not limited to, improving safety and security through enhanced community policing and border security, delivering better management of labor markets through the new Department of Workforce Opportunities and Residency Cayman, reforming our social assistance programs to ensure that the right persons get the right benefits at the right time, establishing a new ministry to foster international relations and promote foreign investment in the Cayman Islands, enhancing tourism marketing to high-value source markets and continued implementation of the National Tourism Plan, enhancing financial services policy functions and the regulatory services provided by the Cayman Islands Monetary Authority in response to the ever-evolving international regulatory changes, continuing to develop and implement enhanced information technology services, including improved cybersecurity and e-commerce, e-government initiatives, continued enhancement of teaching and learning in schools with a focus on increasing the use of online and computerized testing and strengthening core curriculum across primary and secondary schools, implementing this integrated solid waste management system, conducting the comprehensive population and housing census in 2020, commencement of operations of the new long-term residential mental health facility, and the preparation and execution of the 2021 general elections. Looking next, Mr. Speaker, at capital investment forecasts. Mr. Speaker, over the SPS period, planned public sector capital investments are forecast to total some $383.4 million and will be spread over the 3 years as follows: $177.7 million in 2020, $126.4 million in 2021, and $79.3 million in 2022. These investments will fund debt servicing obligations and operations of our statutory authorities and government companies, as well as the development of key infrastructure by the core government, such as 1, the completion of the John Gray High School and upgrades to other key school infrastructure, addressing the major traffic issues from eastern districts by extending the east-west arterial and offer other key upgrades to the roads network, remediation of the Georgetown landfill and implementation of the integrated solid waste management system, and construction of a long-term residential mental health facility. Turning next, Mr. Speaker, to compliance with the principles of responsible financial management. Mr. Speaker, maintaining compliance with the principles of responsible financial management is another core element of this government's fiscal strategy. For the next 3 financial years, we are forecasting that government will maintain compliance with those principles. Let me speak now to each of them. Operating surplus. The PMFL requires that government maintain a positive operating surplus. And over the next 3 years, core government is forecast to remain in compliance with this requirement, with the core government's operating surpluses forecast to be $94.9 million in 2020, $109.2 million in 2021, and $90.1 million in 2022. These surpluses are critical to generating cash to pay off debt, maintain cash reserves, and fund capital investments in both core government and or SAGCs, or statutory authorities and government companies. Over the SPS period, our SAGCs combined are forecast to record a small net surplus of $0.795 million in 2020 and net losses of $1.2 million in 2021 and $1.8 million in 2022. Debt service ratio. PMFL requires that the annual entire public sector debt service costs, interest and principal, not be greater than 10% of core government revenues. The SPS forecast indicates that the government will be well below this limit, with the debt service ratio forecast to be 6.8% in 2020, 6.2% in 2021, and 6.1% in 2022. This ratio will be at its lowest level too in many, many years. This means that more of government's revenues will be available to fund the demands for services or capital projects that the government wishes to undertake. Net debt ratio. The PMFL requires that the government's net debt not exceed 80% of core government's operating revenues. Net debt is calculated as the total amount of outstanding core government debt plus the risk-weighted debt of SAGCs less the liquid assets of the core government. Government is forecast to be in full compliance with this requirement over the 3 financial years, with net debt ratio forecast to be 3.8% in 2020, 0.3% in 2021, and negative 5.5% in 2022, as core government cash balances will exceed debt balances of the entire public sector. Mr. Speaker, a very enviable position to be in for a government. This significant reduction places government well below the maximum allowed limit of 80% and is consistent with our overall strategy of debt reduction and no new incremental borrowing. Cash reserves. The PMFL requires the government have liquid cash reserves of not less than 90 days of estimated executive expenses. This ratio is calculated at the point in the financial year when government's liquid cash reserves are expected to be at their lowest point. Typically, this is 31st of December in each year. Over the period, government is forecast to maintain full compliance with this principle, as allowable liquid cash reserves for the purpose of the ratio calculation are expected to be $241 million or 119.9 days in 2020, 231 million or 113.7 days in 2021, and $241.4 million or 118 days in 2020. In conclusion, Mr. Speaker, the 2020 Strategic Policy Statement provides a strategic overview of the government's financial resources and how they are likely to be allocated over the next 3 years to fund necessary programs or to progress our key policy initiatives. We will provide continued support of Cayman's financial services industry and direct representation of the Cayman Islands on the global financial stage. We will provide support for the continued development of our vital tourism industry. We will provide increased employment opportunities for all Caymanians. We will reform our social assistance programs to ensure we are providing appropriate help to the right people. We will invest in our youth through the completion of the John Gray High School, upgrades to other key education infrastructure, and the implementation of enhanced curriculum and other education services. And we will implement the integrated solid waste management system, and we will make further improvements to our road network infrastructure. Our government remains steadfast and relentless in its commitment to improve the quality of life for all Caymanians, whilst balancing the need to manage the country's finances in a prudent and responsible manner. This SBS clearly demonstrates that government continues to exercise good stewardship in its management of the fiscal affairs of this paradise we all call our home. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Clark.
CIDB, Cayman Islands Development Bank Annual Report for the 18-month ended December 31st, 2017, to be laid on the table by the Honourable Minister of Finance and Economic Development.
Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. I beg to lay on the table of this Honourable House the annual report of the Cayman Islands Development Bank for the 18-month period ended December 31, 2017.
So ordered. Is the member going to speak?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A few comments from me. Mr. Speaker, the Office of the Auditor General issued an unmodified opinion with an emphasis of matter on the financial statements of the CIDB for the 18-month period ended the 31st of December 2017. The emphasis of matter relates to the following matters: the CIDB being significantly reliant on the continued support of the government from the proceeds of capital injections and services in order to meet its obligations and operational expenditures, and 51% or $14.7 million, including allowances for credit losses of the overall loan portfolio of the CIDB being impaired. Mr. Speaker, the CIDB's loan portfolio totaled $29.1 million prior to a loan loss provision of $3.6 million. As discussed in Note 5 to the financial statements, the majority of the loan portfolio was for mortgages, equivalent to $10.5 million, business loans, $6.5 million, and debt consolidation, $4.9 million. During the 18-month period, the CIDB approved 73 loans totaling $1.3 million. Of these loans, 66 or 90% of the loans were for debt consolidation and student loans. The debt consolidation loans were to assist civil and public servants with liquidating other high interest rate debt. Assets totaled $44.5 million at the 31st of December 2017, of which $25.5 million or 57% comprised the loan portfolio to customers. As disclosed in Note 13 to the financial statements, Mr. Speaker, liabilities total $28.8 million, of which $24.3 million, or 84%, was related to long-term debt. CIDB incurred a net loss of $0.7 million after $1.5 million in net income from operations and incurring $2.2 million of administration expenses. Mr. Speaker, the CIDB ended the 18-month period with $12.8 million in cash, which is comprised of cash held in current and savings accounts, fixed deposits, and on behalf of the Young Nation Builders Scholarship Fund and the Education Council Scholarship Fund. With respect to the Education Council Scholarship Fund, Mr. Speaker, the CIDB acts as an agent for the government and received $0.7 million for providing the scholarship services as outlined in the 2016-17 purchase agreement between the CIDB and the government. The CIDB has no known contingent liabilities as of the 31st of December 2017. On behalf of the government, I express our gratitude to the directors and staff of the CIDB for all of their efforts during the 2017 fiscal year, and thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Ministry of Finance and Economic Development, Cayman Islands Annual Report, 31st of December 2018, to be laid on the table by the Honorable Minister of Finance and Economic Development.
Honorable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have to say this with some delight. I beg to lay on the table of this Honourable House the annual report and audited financial statements of the Ministry of Finance and Economic Development for the year ended the 31st of December 2018.
I'm sure the minister speaking there too.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will. I will exercise my privilege. Mr. Speaker, the Office of the Auditor General issued an unmodified opinion on the financial statements of the Ministry for the year ended the 31st of December 2018. The unmodified opinion signifies that the information contained in the financial statements is materially correct and it can be relied upon. As shown on pages 5 to 6 of the annual report, during the 12-month period ended the 31st of December 2018, the Ministry comprised of 315 staff members, of which 291, or 92%, are Caymanian. 58% of the staff members are female, and the majority of the staff are 41 years and older. Mr. Speaker, some of the Ministry's key events and achievements during the 2018 financial year included the Economic and Statistics Office completing the Occupational Wage Survey, which, Mr. Speaker, will be tabled shortly in this Honourable House and contains a wealth of information on the monthly basic earnings and total compensation of some 19,215 employees in the Cayman Islands. Second, the release of the Labour Force Survey Spring 2018 report, which presented the population in the Cayman Islands as of the end of June 2018 at 64,420, the labour force at 44,213 persons, and an unemployment rate of 3.4%. Tabling of the 2016-17 supplementary budget in this Honourable Legislative Assembly, the gazettal of the government's very first unaudited quarterly report covering the financial period 1st of January to 31st of March 2018. This was an important step in the government's efforts to improve the timeliness of reporting its financial results and position to members of this Legislative Assembly and the public. And Mr. Speaker, I would add that the financial reports for the second and third quarters were also presented on a timely in a timely manner to this Honourable Legislative Assembly as well. Fifth, delivering training related to the new procurement law and regulations, as well as the use of the Cayman Islands procurement portal Bonfire to over 500 civil servants. 1,900 vendors are now registered on the electronic procurement portal, and the Customs Department contributing to the arrest of some 80 persons and seizing more than 6.77 pounds of cocaine, 500 pounds of ganja, and 5 firearms. Mr. Speaker, the Statement of Executive Financial Transactions shows that on behalf of the Cabinet, the Ministry collected $228.5 million in executive revenues, which was $31.1 million or 16% more than budget. The primary reasons for the overachievement was due to an increase in the number and value of imported vehicles, an increase in the demand for alcoholic beverages, and an increase in the quantity and value of other cargo imports. On behalf of the Cabinet, the Ministry incurred $56.9 million in executive expenditures, which was $1.1 million or 2% more than budget. The primary reason for the net over expenditure was due to the government having to provide the Cayman Islands National Insurance Company, Synico, with additional funding in order to maintain the prescribed capital requirement as required by the Insurance, Capital and Insolvency Class A Insurers Regulations 2012 and the Cayman Islands Monetary Authority. The Statement of Financial Position shows that the Ministry ended the financial period with $26.9 million in total assets. Of this amount, $14 million or 52% is cash and cash equivalents, which includes cash on hand, cash in transit, and bank accounts and deposits with a maturity of no more than 3 months. Total liabilities amounted to $6.3 million, the majority of which comprise a $3.8 million surplus payable to the Cabinet that represents the surplus earned during the financial period and which will be repaid to the Cabinet during the 2019 financial year. Net assets, which are total assets less total liabilities, amounted to $20.7 million. The Statement of Financial Performance shows that the Ministry earned $30.4 million in revenue for the period. Most of this revenue was earned from the delivery of outputs to Cabinet and administrative fees and other user charges levied on the public for the delivery of services. The Ministry incurred $26.6 million in expenses during the financial period, of which $20.5 million or 77% comprise personnel costs. Personnel costs include salaries, health insurance, and pension costs. The Ministry achieved an operating surplus of $3.8 million. Mr. Speaker, I believe that the annual report will clearly demonstrate that the Ministry has worked hard this past year to provide effective, efficient, and outstanding public service that represent value for money and contribute to the prosperity and productivity of the Cayman Islands. Mr. Speaker, I am proud of the fact that my Ministry continues to lead by example. Mr. Speaker, we were the first to submit our financial statements to the Auditor General for audit. That was accomplished on the 25th day of January of this year. We were the first entity to complete an audit. Auditor General signed off her opinion on the 15th day of March. Had we been in session as we had originally intended in March, I would have tabled this report at that time. Nevertheless, we are still the first to table the annual report and audited financial statements in this Honourable House as required by law, well ahead of all statutory deadlines. And so this morning, Mr. Speaker, I wish to congratulate and thank the staff of the Ministry and the Office of the Auditor General for their diligence in completing this annual process on a timely basis. Finally, Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the staff and management of the Ministry for all their efforts and the hard work during the 2018 financial year, and I look forward to future successes in the years to come. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.